Andrew Jackson, 7th President of the United States, was born on March 15, 1767, in an unknown location between North and South Carolina. The location is unknown because he was born while his mom was taking a difficult trip home from burying Jackson's father, who died 3 weeks back in an accident. He was born into a Scots-Irish family of his mother Elizabeth and two brothers Hugh and Robert. But Hugh died from heat exhaustion during the Battle of Stono Ferry when Andrew was approximately 12 years old. When he was 13, he supported the local militia in the Revolutionary War by acting as a courier for them, but him and his brother were captured by British soldiers. When Jackson refused to shine a British soldier's boots, he got slashed with a sword, which left scars on his head and left hand. While in the British camp, both of the brothers contracted smallpox, which would kill Robert a few days after their release, but Jackson pulled through. Jackson received a sporadic education, but in his late teens he studied law for a couple of years, and after that he got accepted to the bar and became a lawyer in Jonesboro, which is now northeastern Tennessee. Because Jackson was born into a family that had very little fame, he had to rise on his own merit. He built a mansion named the Hermitage near Nashville, Tennessee, and got tons of slaves to run it. In the Times period standards, he treated his slaves well by giving them guns and fishing rods to get food and some money to trade in local towns. Jackson was also the first man elected from Tennessee to the House of Representatives. He also served for a short time in the Senate. In addition, he became a renowned general after his massive win against the British at the Battle of New Orleans. All of these factors led to him being nominated for president by the Democratic Party for the election of 1824. Jackson had the most popular and electoral votes, but he didn't have the majority votes, so the House of Representatives had to decide who would become president, and they chose John Quincy Adams instead of Jackson. This event led to be known as the Corrupt Bargain. In the election of 1828, Jackson got another chance at the presidency as the corrupt bargain made it possible to get many people on his side. The election was fierce, where people would resort to such things like accusing Jackson's wife of bigamy, which was technically true, as when she tried to divorce her husband, he only received permission to divorce and didn't actually make the divorce official. Jackson's opponents would also call him a jackass, which Jackson quite liked, so he used it as a symbol for a while. This later became the symbol for the Democratic Party, as cartoonist Thomas Nast made it more popular. Despite these attacks against Jackson, he prevailed and became the 7th President of the United States. Throughout Jackson's life, he was extremely erratic and often got into fights and duels over honor. The exact number of duels Jackson got in is not known, but it is predicted to be in the range of 5 to 100. One notable duel Jackson participated in was when a rival horse breeder named Charles Dickinson accused Jackson of cheating in a horse race. As Jackson refused and got more angry, Dickinson also brought up Rachel Jackson's bigamy, and that infuriated Jackson so much that he challenged Dickinson to a duel. This video well demonstrates what came out of it.
On May 30th, 1806, Jackson and Dickinson met at Harrison's Mill on the Red River. By design, Jackson let Dickinson fire first.
The smoke from the gun and the looseness of Jackson's overcoat made it such that Dickinson had to watch Jackson's reaction to see if he'd actually hit him. Jackson took a half a step back and regained his position. This is where Dickinson cries out, "Great God, have I missed him?" Because he's not used to missing too terribly often. So now it's Jackson's turn, where he can raise his pistol and fire. His gun doesn't go off, and Jackson is so mad at Dickinson that he makes him stand there while he fixes his gun, takes aim for a second time, and this time his gun does indeed go off.
Supporters of Dickinson claim Jackson shooting twice was a breach of etiquette. When Jackson fired, it was pretty clear that Dickinson was mortally wounded.
As you can see, Jackson is extremely obsessed with protecting his honor and the honor of the people close to him. The quality of Jackson as president is very much debated, as he made many controversial decisions, such as laying the foundation for the Indian Removal Act, which led to the death of thousands of Indians as they were forced to move west into reserves made by the government. Jackson only supported this act. It was actually Martin Van Buren who enforced the law. Another controversial decision in Jackson's presidency was the nullification crisis, in which South Carolina threatened to nullify an extremely high tariff which hurt farmers in the South, but helped industry owners in the North. Jackson convinced Congress to pass the Force Act, which gave the government power to use the Army and Navy to collect taxes. A third controversial decision is explained in this video.
So in 1832, bank leader Nicholas Biddle persuaded Congress to pass a bill extending the life of the second U.S. bank for 20 years. Jackson thought that the bank would use its money to oppose his re-election in 1836, so he vetoed that bill. Now, Whigs took exception to the idea that the president was somehow a more democratic representative of the people than the legislature, but in the end, Jackson's view won out. He used the veto power more than any prior president, turning it into a powerful tool of policy, which it remains to this day, by the way. So the second bank of the U.S. expired in 1836, which meant that suddenly we had no central institution with which to control federal funds. Jackson ordered that money should be dispersed into local banks, unsurprisingly preferencing ones that were friendly to him. These so-called pet banks were another version of rewarding political supporters that Jackson liked to call rotation in office. Opponents called this tactic of awarding government offices to political favorites the spoils system. Anyway, these smaller banks proceeded to print more and more paper money because, you know, free money. Initially, states loved all this new money that they could use to finance internal improvements, but inflation is really bad for wage workers and also eventually everyone. So all this out-of-control inflation, coupled with rampant land speculation, eventually led to an economic collapse, the Panic of 1837. The subsequent depression lasted until 1843, and Jackson's bank policy proved to be arguably the most disastrous fiscal policy in American history, which is really saying something.
Jackson's use of the veto and going over Congress's head to make these decisions made people really angry. These people formed a political party called the Whigs. The Whigs formed their party off the idea of a similar political party in Britain which strongly opposed monarchy. These people thought Jackson and the federal government as a whole was reaching too far into the people's lives. These people comprised of individuals who were part of Jeffersonian democracy, but left because they believed that Jackson wasn't a Democrat anymore, as his decisions and enforcements were extremely anti-democratic. And the second part was business owners in the Northeast and other people who supported the bank. After serving 2 terms in office, Jackson returned home to the Hermitage and brought it back under his management, as it had been poorly managed by his adopted son. He had much smaller hand in politics, and on June 8, 1845, at the age of 78, of chronic tuberculosis, dropsy, and heart failure, Andrew Jackson died. It is so hard for people to classify this man as good or bad, as some people thought he overstepped his grounds as president, going over Congress's heads and doing what he wanted, but others would say he did all this for democracy and to keep American people free. Now it's time for Max's excellent editorial time, where I share my thoughts on the subject. I believe that Jackson was nothing more than a bigot and an angry, mean person who would just get in fights for the fun of it and make decisions with little advisement. And as I kept researching, I found out that to be true, with the killing of Charles Dickinson, the Trail of Tears, the bank veto, all of these things are so crazy and seemingly evil and erratic. But when you get the added context that his entire family died, and he was orphaned at such a young age, you can't help but feel empathy for this man that I've been classifying as horrible in my mind this entire time. And yet I also feel a sense of amazement, because he rose to president out of nothing. His family was poor, the only solid education he ever received was the 2-year period of studying law in his late teens, and he took the little that he had and forged it into a life of politics, and became the most respected man in America at the time. I can't decide how I feel for him because I have so many conflicting feelings about him. Amazement, hatred, and empathy are things that you shouldn't feel for one person at the same time. So that's the end, guys. Thanks for watching.